been a hot minute since I was on camera. I got new glasses. This video was made assuming that you've at least seen the first season of Netflix's The Umbrella Academy to completion. Alright? Alright. You know, honestly, in the gap between Season 1 and now, I haven't actually been all that hyped for Umbrella Academy Season 2. I'm one of a number of people who thinks of Umbrella Academy as kind of like a trifecta of shows with Doom Patrol and with The Boys, and these three shows sort of being these very unique flavors of for mature audiences, but also embracing this very sort of like indulgent, almost childlike penchant for weird absurdism. And I think I was really more enamored with the idea of the Umbrella Academy as the first of those three shows to drop, because I look back on it a little bit less favorably than I do Doom Patrol Season 1 or The Boys Season 1. Thankfully, I'm happy to report, I think Umbrella Academy Season 2 was a pretty big improvement. I still don't know if I'd say it's at Doom Patrol's level, because Doom Patrol Seasons 1 and 2 so far have been some of my favorite television that I've ever seen. But this is the Umbrella Academy video and not the Doom Patrol video. I'm going to be avoiding any direct spoilers for Season 2, because, you know, I don't want to be one of those guys. Consider anything that's been in the marketing or, like, the basic premise of the season to be fair game. With that said, we end Season 1 with the gang basically causing the apocalypse, which they'd worked all season to prevent, and transporting themselves away somewhere in time. We open Season 2 with everyone landing in the early 1960s. And I say the early 60s because they're all kind of separated by different gaps of time. And so when everyone does eventually coalesce in 1963, we've got a really interesting new sort of status quo, and relationships have changed and characters' outlooks have changed. And personally, I think a large part of, well, two large parts of what really increase my enjoyment of the show for Season 2. One of them is more shallow, which is just, I'm a sucker for a period piece. The 60s aesthetic, I really enjoy. 60s fashion, 60s sort of just like the way that everything looks. I really dig that. And so spending all of our time in this sort of quaint small-town 60s location was neat for me. And secondly, more substantially, is I feel, with the foundation having been laid by Season 1, the character relationships are more comfy. The main characters, the 7 Hargreeves siblings, their dynamic was very, understandably and intentionally, very strained and standoffish and not too familial for most of Season 1. And everyone kind of had their own separate lives and was off in their own spheres, and when those spheres intersected there was a lot of clashing. Whereas here, while relationships still have a little bit of strain to them, there's a much greater sense of warmth and unity amongst the siblings in Season 2 than there was in Season 1. And you get the sense that they've all kind of come to understand and appreciate each other a little bit more than they did last season. And so while everyone very much still has their own subplots, there's a lot less of the feeling that you're watching sort of 5 or 6 different stories that just happen to intersect and have proximity and eventually coalesce at the end. These are 7 characters, sometimes 6, because of, you know, Ben being all ghosty, who have one shared goal, who spend a majority of the season in the same place, working toward the same end. And the camaraderie and the chemistry that comes from having them all be on a sort of united front like that, it just really makes for an easier watch through than Season 1 was. And something that I think, I hope, will sort of hold up for me better looking back on it. It also helps that, I suppose, as sort of like a side effect of that, and I also just think the show being a little bit, not smarter, but a little bit attuned to certain preferences, is I enjoy all of the characters more than I have previously. And what I mean by that is, like, I feel like still, as far as performances go, the standouts are Aidan Gallagher and Robert Sheehan. Aidan Gallagher because 5 is a very difficult character to play, you know, this old man in a, like, child body who constantly has to juggle being the one who cares the most about his siblings and has kind of like the heaviest weight to carry in regards to just wanting to keep his family safe, and also being by far the most frustrated with all of his siblings because he's so much older and because he just has so much bigger perspective beyond all their petty squabbles. And Robert Sheehan, who I've loved since I saw him on Misfits as Nathan, basically the star of that show. Him as Klaus is always just a great source of levity and pathos, and just the two of them I love, and I've always loved them. Everyone else in the show I was always kind of hit or miss with, and this season I feel like really remedied that. And the biggest case of that is Luther, where Luther was ostensibly the lead character of season 1. It was still very much an ensemble show, but, you know, he was number 1. He kept sort of forcing himself into the leadership position, and so the show kind of granted him that. I found him really frustrating, and I know that I'm not the only one. And he's still a little bit frustrating in season 2, but now there's this real tangible sense that the show is aware that he is an actual whole idiot, and the show being aware of that fact makes it really easy to, where I would previously look at him being a total doofus and just be really frustrated and be like, oh my god, you're really holding this show down. Here, I'm able to look at him being a doofus and just laugh at it and find it actually kind of endearing. And the show, I think, utilizes him well now, where he really is not the lead anymore, and he doesn't even have the pretensions of the lead. If anything, he's almost the comic relief that everyone else is bouncing off of. Because while everyone does have the same ultimate goal in this season, there are still, you could argue, like 5 or 6 different subplots going on. Everyone is invested in getting back to the present, getting back to 2019, but there is also this element of everyone has their own thing sort of going on in 1963. And Luther's the one really who has the least substantial subplot. I wouldn't even call it a subplot. He does have a character arc that is fairly subtle, but as far as the machinations of the story, Luther is really the least pivotal, and what that allows him to do is to be the guy who sort of bounces between everyone else's subplots and gives everyone sort of like this sounding board and like this goofy kind of sidekick to work with. We also really heavily downsize the sort of uncomfortable romantic subplot between him and Allison. Allison, who I've always found interesting, and who's always been a sort of morally complex character. I feel like her character and the entirety of season 1 was really held back by the relationship between her and Luther and how genuinely creepy it is, because they are explicitly romantic, and yet the show can't decide if it wants to have its cake and eat it too, with are they siblings or is it okay because none of them are biological. Season 2 really just decides to hell with it and tosses that whole thing aside for the most part. Like, Luther still very much is attracted to Allison, but we play it mostly for kind of pathetic laughs. And on Allison's side, she has a whole husband and has a whole subplot going on that, being a black woman in the 1960s doesn't really allow her the chance to indulge in will they, won't they with her adopted brother, which is great. The fact that that whole thing is not necessarily gone, but so downplayed that it might as well be gone, real boon for this season. There are, I think you could argue, things to critique about Allison's subplot and the way that the show handles sort of like the racial dynamics, and they literally dedicate time to sit-ins, and the fact that her and her husband are active leaders in the cultural movement. And you could argue for a show like this, not just with the tone that it has, but with the fact that it has so many other things to juggle and so much high concept stuff to make that share screen time with, does it handle the racial issues in the best way? I don't know. I honestly feel like if you want the sort of like perfect weird comic book show to handle racial issues, just go watch Watchmen. I don't think it does anything problematic necessarily, but it really is just that fact of, by nature of this show, the sort of dealing with race in the 1960s angle of it only gets to be 1/7 of a season. Ben, who I mentioned earlier, being the dead sibling who only Klaus can see, we do some cool stuff with him this season, some of it that I don't want to get into too much because it could be considered a spoiler, but by nature, I suppose, of his role, he wasn't given too much to do in Season 1 beyond being kind of the conscience for Klaus, and while the two of them do still spend most of their time bouncing back and forth off each other in ways that are really, really funny, Ben does get a few key moments to just be his own character, and those moments are really, really great. Diego, like Luther, I think, is an example of characters who were a little too self-serious and who the show maybe treated a little too seriously, getting a bit more sort of like fun to mess around with, because Diego's character has always been rooted in this sort of hero complex that he has. And in the first season, that manifested as him being kind of like the very self-serious, basically Batman. Like, it was the 2007 TMNT thing. He was Raphael, he was the Night Watcher. He was the one, like, dedicated to being a vigilante superhero, while all of his other siblings did their own things. Here, he opens the season in the loony bin and has, like, fully dedicated himself to stopping the Kennedy assassination. And he gets an interesting relationship this season, and we do some cool things with him, but he gets to be a little bit more of, not that he wasn't a fun character in Season 1, but now he really gets to be just kind of loose and a little bit crazy. And even Vanya, lastly, to mention her, she is still, much like Season 1, the one with the biggest, most serious, most pathos-y storyline. But even her, we do a neat thing with her where she's allowed to be a little bit more of a relaxed character and have a relationship with her siblings that gets to feel way more mutual and way more affectionate than it was at any point in Season 1. And there's even this great moment really late into Season 2 where they sort of set you up to think that, oh man, the dynamics between Vanya and the other siblings maybe haven't changed as much as we would have liked them to in Season 1, and we're setting ourselves up for another case of, ah man, Vanya is the odd one out and no one really respects her, and then we subvert that in a really great, beautiful way. And I just felt so happy for Vanya throughout the majority of this season. And I just felt sort of jazzed about just the way that the dynamic between these characters has really coalesced into something that is still completely dysfunctional, but really has that warmth and familial quality to it that Season 1 was very much about them not having. There are a couple of notable characters from Season 1 who we lose. Plenty that we keep, though, in the sake of streamlining the plot. Now, I know how that sounds when you have an ensemble story where you've got 6 or 7 people all with their own subplots. Obviously, there's still a little bit of convolutedness, but the dynamic of who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, how many different separate parties do we have in the grander sort of like doomsday plot operating to their own ends, that's been fairly streamlined. We don't have Hazel and Cha-Cha from last season, who were initially part of the Commission, there to like handle Five and Doomsday, but very much went off into their own subplot and their own relationship drama, etc. They're gone. The Handler's back, and her creepy, sort of like pseudo-sexual chemistry with Five is back. And like, I don't say that as like a slam. I find her and that dynamic like really interesting. And having her basically be the big bad of the season without any of the sort of things that made her role in Season 1 overly complicated really works to this season's benefit. We've got characters connected to her, the role of whom is pretty straightforward comparatively, and we've got, our cast of supporting characters unique to the 1960s. Some of whom are more interesting and obviously more plot relevant than others, and all of them are played fairly well. Obviously, what they would all have in common is that they're really existing in service of the main ensemble, and they play that role nicely. I suppose you could call what's coming up next very minor spoilers. I'm just going to briefly talk about some things without context that I think would be a little bit of a surprise going into the season totally blind. So just skip ahead a little bit to here, just for final thoughts. But before that, I want to briefly talk about the fact that we bring in Reginald Hargreeves, we bring in the siblings' mom, like not the robot mom, but their actual mom, or like the woman who the mom robot was modeled after. Reginald and her show up. Obviously, it's their younger selves, and I like what we do there. I like that we actually take the opportunity to humanize Reggie. Well, humanize in a manner of speaking, but yeah, we give some dimensions to his character and hers, and we leave them in an interesting place where I'm really eager to know what their deal is coming into Season 3. We also get to see a little bit more of old Five, like the actor who would play like Five in his properly aged body, and I really like that we get to spend a little bit more time with him, because you get to look at his performance and see how he really is playing the same person that Aidan Gallagher is playing, and I feel like there's a nice synchronicity to their performances where, yeah, they totally feel like they're playing the same person, just one of them being stuck in the wrong body. Shouts to my boy Herb at the Commission, neat character, love Herb, and AJ, literal fishbowl head, not Mysterio, but you know what I mean. Leonard is another character from Season 1 who, like the Luther and Allison romance, I feel like wasn't not intentionally downsized because, he's dead by the end of that season anyway, but we keep mentions of him to a minimum. He really only comes up in dialogue like the once, I think, and that's for the best, because I think his character was kind of a drag on Season 1, like he was unremarkable and unlikable in equal measure on purpose, but I think his absence is another one of those just little things that give the show a more breathable feeling for this second season. Screw Leonard. All my homies hate Leonard. But yeah, to wrap things up, can you tell that I really didn't script much of this? It was a bit of a ramble. I really do wholeheartedly recommend Umbrella Academy Season 2. I've been dogging on Season 1 a lot this video. I do enjoy Season 1, but the improvement just as a watching experience for me personally from Season 1 to Season 2 was tangible. I didn't leave Season 1 super excited for a continuation, and I haven't been super excited for this until having watched it. I'm genuinely excited for Season 3, and I'm going into that season liking all of the characters more than I liked them coming off of Season 1. So, that's my endorsement. I don't know. If you've already seen Season 2 in its entirety, what did you think? if you're making your way through. How are you feeling about it so far? Has this video convinced you to keep at it? Were you someone who wasn't firmly into Season 1? And just, what do you feel about any of my thoughts on this video? And just how do you feel about any of the thoughts that I've expressed here? Comment below, let me know. Like and subscribe, obviously. And I hope you guys continue to enjoy my stuff. Bye-bye.